Exactly 8 years ago this week, I drove into Louisville with all of my worldly possessions packed into a U-Haul and my aging but loyal Nissan Sentra. The weather was scorchingly hot and humid, which honestly surprised me because at that point I still thought of Louisville as being up north. So where was my cool northern spring? Lesson very quickly learned. After a long day of driving up from a small town in Georgia and then unloading everything into a storage unit with the help of a motley crew of youth and young adults from the church, I said goodbye to my parents who had so graciously helped me move. I got ready for bed and settled into my temporary lodging, and then I cried myself to sleep with big heaving sobs and a chest full of anxiety. All I could think was, what have I done? Today we begin a 3-part series called Good Grief, where we're talking about, you guessed it, grief. Grief is something we all experience at one point or another in our lives, and it's not a fun time. We often think of grief as something people go through after a loved one has died, but it's much more than that. Grief, as defined by the Cleveland Clinic, is the experience of coping with loss and can accompany any event that disrupts or challenges our sense of normalcy or ourselves. We don't just experience grief when a loved one dies. We experience grief when relationships end, or when we experience life changes like retirement, graduation, health diagnoses, moving, and more. As I mentioned, grief is a universal experience, and it's not exactly something any of us looks forward to going through. So why did we call this series Good Grief? Because while the circumstances that cause us to grieve are not good, the process and outcome of grief can be. Grief is a necessary part of the healing process. We have to let ourselves go through it if we want to get to a place of healing and peace with what has happened. Grief is also good in that it signals to us that whatever or whoever we are grieving mattered. We don't grieve things that have no impact on our lives or hearts. Grief has a way of making us more honest with ourselves and sometimes with other people. It clarifies what actually matters to us. Finally, grief has the potential to connect us to each other, whether it's because we're grieving the same event or because we all know what it's like to experience loss. Though grief can destroy relationships, it also has the potential to make them stronger. So like I said, grief itself is messy and difficult, but hopefully by the end of this series, we'll be able to see the potential good that can come from it. We'll talk about coping with grief after death and relationships ending in the coming weeks. But today, we're going to start with a type of grief that we don't always acknowledge as grief, the grief that comes with change. So let's go back to my first night, or really first few months in Louisville. On the one hand, I was so excited to be here. I loved the city. I already had some friends living here. I was working at my dream church, and I was so hopeful about the future. Everything was coming up roses. The world was my oyster and all that. On the other hand, I felt a deep sadness for the place I'd left behind. I loved my apartment in Georgia and my extremely walkable neighborhood. I missed most of my coworkers and the friends I'd made, and in some small way, I felt like I'd failed everyone, or at least let them down by not being able to stick it out when the ministry environment became toxic. It felt ungrateful and also contradictory to be so sad and so happy at the same time, but I now know that those first few months in Louisville, I was grieving. I was grieving the loss of the life I thought I'd have, the friends I'd left behind, the loss of routine and certainty that I'd developed over the years in my previous job. Change is hard, but it is also inevitable. The writer of Ecclesiastes reminds us of this in chapter 3 when he writes that for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven. He then goes on to list examples like a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to harvest, and a time to keep and a time to throw away, just to name a few. The writer's examples include changes that we have control over, and changes that we don't. Change is one of the few things we can count on throughout our lives, and as a result, we can also count on regularly experiencing loss, even if the change is ultimately a good thing. In order for us to move through and cope with change well, we need to be able to acknowledge what we've lost and grieve it. Therapists have identified at least 3 main types of loss associated with life changes and transitions. The first type of loss we may experience is a loss of identity or purpose. Take, for example, a change in our career or employment status. For many people, their job is deeply entwined with their identity and sense of self. The first thing we ask people after their names is usually, "Where do you work?" But then you get fired, or change career fields, or retire, and now you wonder, who am I if not a nurse? Who am I if not a teacher? Who am I if not a lawyer? Who am I if I'm not working? It's disorienting to lose or move on from parts of your identity. You may even miss it or feel jealous of others who are still getting to do what you used to do. You may feel like you no longer have purpose. Other times we experience a loss of identity can be when we go from single to married, married to divorced, active child rearing to empty nesters, able-bodied to disabled, student to workforce, or all the changes that come with aging. These changes aren't all bad, but they all force us to examine how we view and understand ourselves. The second type of loss is a loss of routine. Even if you claim to be a free spirit or someone who just likes to go with the flow, humans are creatures of habit. Routines and habits give us stability and increase our sense of safety. Life transitions disrupt our familiar routines, and it's uncomfortable to not know what to expect or be challenged. We have to spend time finding a new rhythm and routine, which takes patience and a willingness to learn. Finally, the third type of loss is a loss of relationships. Changes like moving, getting a new job, going off to college often lead to changes within the dynamics of our existing friendships, whether that's not having as close of a relationship or the relationship fizzling out altogether. It's not fun, and it hurts, even and maybe especially if there's no big falling out or blow-up moment. So not only are you going through a big life change, you're having to do it without people you previously would have leaned on for support. Taking all of these losses into account, you start to understand why we struggle with changes, both good and bad, both expected and unexpected. We aren't just managing the obvious big change, but all of the little changes that come with it. So it's perfectly normal for us to feel overwhelmed, sad, angry, excited, hopeful, and resistant, all at the same time. Which is why it's important for us to make space for grief whenever we experience life transitions. We can't fully write a new chapter if we're stuck reading the previous one. So how do we navigate grief and change in a healthy way? We can start by simply naming our grief, honestly and without shame. Wounds can't heal if we don't acknowledge their existence. If you're feeling angry or resentful about a change that doesn't feel like your choice, if you're sad because you're going to miss your former coworkers, if you're anxious about whether or not you made the right decision, if you're disappointed because you've got to let go of a dream you had for your life, say it. Whatever you're feeling, give it a name and let yourself feel it without feeling guilty or like you shouldn't feel that way. Give yourself the gift of letting go of either or thinking. You can feel multiple contradictory things at once. That's called being human, and life is full of those paradoxes. Navigating change is hard to do alone, so another step we can take is to seek connection and community. Grief can feel so isolating and tempt us to retreat into ourselves. But what if we took the brave step of reaching out instead? Maybe that looks like confiding in a trusted friend or family member. Maybe it means finding a group of people to have fun with or volunteer in the community with. Maybe it means spending time with a therapist to process everything you're feeling and experiencing. The kind of connection we need during life transitions will depend on the situation, but figure out what you want and need and go for it. Another underrated tool for navigating grief is ritual, specifically rituals for letting go and for closing one chapter and beginning a new one. We already have a few of these rituals and rites of passage. As we speak, it's graduation season, and many people are knee-deep in invitations to graduation parties and ceremonies from preschool to college. Graduations celebrate a student's hard work over the years and send them off into their next stage of life. Then, of course, there are other big moments like weddings and baby showers and retirement parties that celebrate the changes those moments signify. But those aren't the only kinds of rituals and moments that our lives change. For me, I've found that I like using art to symbolize different periods of my life. I have paintings that I've commissioned from talented friends or trinkets gifted to me by important people in my life. I've created photo albums and filled journals. And each time I look at any of those things, I remember the period of my life they represent and the people that made it special. This has been one of the ways I make peace with change, by carrying reminders of where I've been with me as I step into the future. Some people throw themselves parties with friends or families when they get a new job, to commiserate after a breakup or to celebrate a brave decision. Some people get tattoos. Some people write songs or make playlists. Others write what they want to let go of on a piece of paper and burn it. Some take a trip. Some write prayers, blessings, and benedictions. The options are endless. Find what is meaningful for you in your particular situation and do it. I was reminded of the importance of a closing ritual this week when my Preaching Justice Fellowship ended. For the last 9 months, I met every other week with a cohort of 7 fellow preachers and ministers. We laughed together, shared life stories and sermons. We talked theology and ministry and just being a human existing in the world right now. As we met for the last time on Wednesday, I was overcome with so many different emotions, including gratitude for each of them, and sadness that our official time together is over. Something that helped, though, was how we ended. We spent time reflecting on the last year and what we've learned. We shared what we hope stays with us long after the fellowship, and we expressed gratitude and affirmation of the gifts we saw in one another. We aren't always so lucky to have a group of people to process an ending with, but if that's a possibility in your situation, invite other people to mark that moment with you. As we navigate change and the accompanying grief throughout our lives, we can take comfort in at least one certainty: God is with us always. I think about the passage in Isaiah 43 when Israel is about to experience some big changes if they do what God is calling them to do. God takes time to comfort and encourage them, saying, "Do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze." When we walk through the waters of change and rivers of grief, God is with us. At our most vulnerable, we are not alone. Change is a part of being alive and doesn't have to be something we fear. Change brings loss, but it also makes way for possibilities and growth. My hope and prayer is that by learning to acknowledge grief as part of the process of change, we'll be able to navigate it in healthier ways that connect us and heal us. Oh, and in case you're wondering, I don't cry myself to sleep at night anymore because it turns out moving to Louisville is one of the best decisions I've ever made. Amen.